Dr. Lauren Cook, welcome to the show. I am thoroughly excited to have you here.
Oh, me too, Stu. It was fun talking San Diego with you before we hit record. I'm going to have to now make a trip.
Yeah, absolutely. I will give you all the recommendations, the food spots, all of the good stuff. And so, as we dive in here today, I would love it if you could kind of give just like an inside look of what did life look like for little Lauren as you were growing up? Like what was life like for little Lauren?
Oh, I love that question. Well, okay, funny enough, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a dentist. And I think I
Huh.
was the only person my age that I encountered that wanted to be a dentist. But I always have had like a little bit of a performer in me too. So growing up, I was
Interesting.
always the little ballet dancer, the little singer, the little mediocre piano player. I loved all of that stuff. And, for a long time too, growing up, I'm like, maybe I want to be an actor or something like that,
Yeah.
Grew up about an hour north of LA. Things evolve, things change, but I think that performer in me, that Enneagram 3, if we have any Enneagram folks on the call today,
Nice.
that was shining through even from a very young age.
Love that. And so when in your life did you go from I want to be a dentist, maybe a performer, um, to, obviously now you help people with therapy and you do a lot in that world and anxiety. And so like at what point, I guess, did the dentistry dream die? And you kind of went on to the next phase.
I think when I realized all the biology and math classes that would be required, that was about
Yeah.
the end of that. Obviously, anybody who's interested in STEAM, go for it. But
Yeah.
I really that piece of wanting to entertain and perform stayed with me throughout high
Hmm.
school. I still continued as a ballet dancer till I was 16 and would sing
Really?
and all those different things. And then it kind of evolved going into college where I thought maybe I want to do something with journalism, really starting to merge like, okay, that performance piece of like being on camera, but wanting to tie in, what's going on in the world. And then I
Yeah.
really saw it start to evolve even more of like knowing, my core value is helping people. How
Hmm.
do I still tie that in with that love and that passion I have to perform? How do I merge those worlds together? And that's kind of where I came to where I am now.
Dang. That is I feel like you were a very smart kid growing up. Like the amount of, you know what I mean? Like it's not that often that you go through life. You're like, well, I'm good at this and I value this. And how do I partner it with that? I'm curious for you, how did you kind of get to that space of realizing like, okay, my core value is helping people. Like, how
Yeah.
did you even get to that? Because I feel like that in itself is like, wow, kudos.
Oh, well, maybe a little parentified as a kid. I don't know.
Yeah.
I grew up as an only child, and I think sometimes with only children, not to typecast us, but
Yeah.
we spend a lot of time with adults, not always a ton of time with our peers. So
True.
that could
Huh.
have been a part of it, I think, for sure. And it was really interesting. I think a big turning point for me, because I spent a little time working at E News, which was always a dream of mine. Like I've always loved entertainment and things like that. But I remember we were in this morning meeting once, and it's like 5:30 a.m. And
Yeah.
we literally spent like 20 minutes talking about what Justin Bieber wore that day. No knock on Justin Bieber or the people who
Yeah.
work with Justin Bieber, but I found myself just thinking, you know what? I'm not sure this fills my particular cup. And so
Yeah.
that was a real turning point for me of like, when I look back on my life, I really do want to feel like I'm making a difference
Yeah.
somehow, that I can hopefully be a part of helping someone. And that
I
was
love
kind of
that.
a big turning point.
I love it. Yeah, I have a friend that he worked in the news for a couple of years and he no longer works in it because he was like, I mean, kudos to people that work in the news, but he was like,
It's
it's 24/7 a day. What's wrong in the world and how can we share that with the world to get more eyeballs on our channel?
That sums it up right there.
It's crazy. So I'm glad you got out of that and you're doing what you're doing now. So let's say then you do e-news, you get the internship there, and eventually, do you remember at what point like therapy came as like an idea into you in your life of like, wow, this like, did you meet someone that was a therapist? Did you talk to a therapist? Did you have a therapist in the family? Or was it kind of just Yeah. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I went to therapy intermittently growing up. And I think it wasn't until I was actually in grad school that I realized, like, oh, this is why I'm here. I don't think I really even realized for myself, like, how much anxiety I was having in my own life. And, growing up, young age, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 2 years old, stage 3. I have no conscious recollection of my mom being sick, but from what everyone has told me, she was very sick. Like, it's amazing that she's surviving and she's alive and healthy today,
Let's go, Mom.
25 plus years later. But ever since I was a little kid, I have had a severe phobia of vomit. I know that sounds wild. It's a phobia, but it like took over my life and so much of my childhood and even my college experience, right? I mean, if you think about the college party scene, like
Yeah.
the puke is a big
You're
part
going
of
to struggle there for sure.
I did struggle. I struggled so much. And it was so infuriating to me because it was like, this shouldn't be something that's ruling and running my life. But it really was. It was making me feel totally out of control.
Huh.
And, looking back, being in grad school, I realized, wow, okay, that's why I have my phobia. My mom being sick with
Oh.
chemo, getting sick all the time. I have no memory of it, but I realized that association. And so, it wasn't until I went through the whole program that I had those moments of realization, and it was life changing for me. And ever since then, I want to help people have those realizations too, because I think it's so powerful to understand why we behave the way we do or why we feel the way we do. And I think on the other side of that can just be total liberation. Doesn't mean
Yeah.
it totally goes away. Like, I still struggle with my phobia, but nowhere near the degree that I did before. And I no longer let it make my life decisions for me anymore. So that's been really important.
Yeah. And it's so crazy how like you and I'm sure you see this with maybe you see tell me if you see this with a lot of people, but it's like so many things happen when we're so little that we're not even like conscious of
Yes.
that
Yes. Yes.
impact our life in such a big way. It's
Mm-hmm.
crazy. Like I was at like I'm obsessed with personal development. So I go to like seminars all the time, and I was at one it was probably 5 years ago now, and they take you through this like experience where it's like look back on your first memory that you ever had as a kid, and
Mm-hmm.
they like take you back to like they're just like let your unconscious guide you there and it'll come to you. And sure enough, if you really do trust and like have faith in that process, it comes to you.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my first, literally my first memory that I ever had in my life was I was in my bedroom as a little kid, and my mom was opening a drawer and she was giving me like my underwear, or like what do kids your huggies or something. She was giving my huggies, and my dad wasn't there, and it was almost this belief I took that like carried throughout the rest of my life, which was like my dad's not here for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I always had this kind of like tough relationship with him growing up, and then he kind of you go through this process and they go think of a moment even before that. And then the moment before that I saw was it was like myself, my older brother, my mom, my dad in our living room when we were kind of hanging out. And the craziest shift that happened for me is they went like, imagine that you were in the person's thought pattern that
Mm-hmm.
you have this negative sort of association that was created in that first memory. And
Mm-hmm.
it took me to this place of like, what was my dad feeling in that moment? And it was like, he just had his second child. Like he had just lost his father shortly before that. So like he was
Wow.
in such a place of like, I'm so happy and lucky and fulfilled that I have my own family, and I got to go to work to support them. But like really this like beautiful, unbelievable, loving thing. But it's like, if you don't do the work to kind of unravel that, and you go through your whole life thinking they're not there for me, it's just crazy how much we can get in our head when we're not even thinking about it. It's
Totally. Well, and it's fascinating too, like how our relationships with our caregivers totally mirror oftentimes the relationships we have as adults. I'm a huge fan
yeah,
of attachment theory, or sometimes with people, I'm kind of the opposite personally of like, you have different relationships with your parents, and then you want to find a partner who's like the exact opposite of that parent.
yeah.
It kind of tends to go one of two ways. And I think it's fascinating how that works.
Can you break down attachment theory a little bit? Because I heard you speak about this earlier and I was like, yeah, can you break that down?
Yeah, absolutely. So attachment theory, think of it like a four square. There's like four different kind of types that we can fall into.
Okay.
One, there's that secure attachment where you see people having just really healthy interdependent relationships where we can connect with people, but we can also take space and distance. Then we have more of our anxious attachment folks, where that's maybe where you see some clinginess or some enmeshment of really feeling like I need to be with you, right? And this is when we can see people stay in relationships for longer than they should because they feel like if I don't have this person, I'm going to totally fall apart.
Right.
Other component that we tend to see is this avoidant attachment style. These are the people who maybe hesitate to get in relationships. I don't need anyone. I don't want to be vulnerable, right? It's a defense mechanism to keep people away.
Yeah.
And then I don't like the titling of this, but what we see is more sometimes a chaotic attachment with that kind of love-hate relationship. I need you in my life, but it doesn't take much for me to get upset with you and push you away. Sometimes we can really see trauma a part of that narrative. People do say sometimes that maybe that's where you see like a borderline personality style come through. And again, no stigma or shame with that at all.
Right.
Like I think BPD in particular gets stigmatized so much, which I don't think is deserved. I think it's just a framework. But yeah, those are the four quadrants and people can just take a test online to see what they come up with. But I think it's hugely helpful.
Is the goal to get to one of the quadrants?
Yeah, the goal is to get to the secure attachment. And the really cool thing about the research, because people will say like, well, shoot, like I'm anxious or I'm avoidant attached. Yeah. We know that if you're with somebody or you have what we fancy term a corrective experience with somebody who, is securely attached or provides you that security in the relationship, you get to see another way and you can change to then have that secure attachment.
Interesting. Sounds easier said than done.
Oh, yeah. Just years of the same patterns over and over and over.
Yeah.
Again, right. But not impossible by any means. And a lot of people say like, that's actually one of the most important things about therapy. Like it's really important to have like helpful interventions in therapy. But what we know is like more than anything, it's the relationship in therapy. Like for someone to come in and see this person cares about me week after week. I can get mad at them. I can express to them how I really feel, and they're not going to abandon or reject me. That's a hugely healing experience for people.
I've never thought about it like that, but that sounds amazing.
I think so.
Yeah.
That's why I love to do the work.
I love it. So let's say then we kind of jump forward. So you start to figure out therapy is something that you're like, this is my lane. I want to help people. I also want to perform. So at some point, performer comes back in, right? And you start speaking. And so I'm curious, walk us through that process. Like, how did you go from, I'm going to become a therapist, and then all of a sudden now especially now at the level you're traveling often, speaking on, hundreds of stages. Fill us in on kind of how did the speaking come about?
Yeah, well, the speaking actually came before the therapy. Interesting. So before, I really transitioned into therapy, I had a whole brand in college called the Sunny Girl. And I was super interested in happiness, maybe even a little toxic positivity, which I'm aware of now. But, I read this book called The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. Maybe you've read it since you proclaim that you love personal development. And I reached out to Gretchen when I was 18 in college. And I said like, hey, I'd love to write a teen edition of The Happiness Project with you. And she was like, good luck to you. Not interested. But she wrote me back. And so I don't know about you, but when someone tells me like, no, I don't want to do that, I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, watch me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just lit a fire. So I wrote my first book throughout college. I self-published it. I'm like, I want to make this happen, and developed this whole brand as a Sunny Girl, where I would wear yellow and speak around the country about happiness. But, I think it was really interesting because I would find like people would have sort of two experiences when I'd be talking about happiness. There'd be some people where it's like you're preaching to the choir, like, yes, I love this, like goal setting, gratitude, like I'm in it. And then some people you could just see the like hate coming from 10 miles away of like, oh my God, like rolling the eyes, like happiness, gag, right?
Yeah.
And I realized like, wow, okay, what's that about? Like what's underneath that? And I realized like people are in so much pain. Like the idea of being happy, I think for a lot of people just feels so insincere and so like far-fetched. And I realized like so many people are just struggling to be okay. And I think that's a huge part of why my work evolved into mental health was to
Mm.
just have way more real conversations with people when they're not feeling happy and how we can actually meet each other there rather than just tell people like, be happy, put a smile on.
Yeah. Like let's talk about the stuff under the rug that you put under there that you don't want to look at, but it's the thing that you need to look at so that you can get to okay, that then we can get to happy.
Exactly. That's it right there.
Yeah, it is. It's like sometimes the most painful conversations to have are the most freeing conversations, I feel like.
Mm. Yeah.
You
Yeah. And
know,
I think you can, yeah, when you can get real with people and get past the small talk, I think you see that your relationships get so much deeper. And I think that's why we all feel so lonely right now because we're all just existing in like gifs and memes, gifs, whatever. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
Yeah, it is crazy. I mean, people go on like I work with some people and it's like you hear some stories of just like going on for decades of your life just holding on to these things and never talking about it or and it's like you got to let it out, you know what I mean? If you just hold on to some of these things that have hurt you and scarred you or whatever it be, like you got it, whether it's therapy, like some way you got to release it. And I'm sure even just in saying it or releasing it, there's a sense of just like pressure release, that allows you to enjoy your life more, really.
Totally. And that's honestly one of my favorite parts of therapy is the normalization piece for people to realize like, wow, it's not just me that still thinks about that moment in second grade when this embarrassing thing happened, like because I wish everybody could see behind a therapy door, like we're all like weird and awkward and clunky and goofy. Like that's just what it
Yeah,
is to be
yeah,
human. And I think we would all just feel so much pressure relieved if we could kind of let our guard down with each other a bit.
for real. I love that. And so like let's say we dive a little bit into your speaking career a little bit more. When you decided and I don't even know if was it a moment of like I want to be a speaker? Was it someone was like, oh, this is cool stuff you're talking about. Can you speak for us? Were you scouting out speaking? Like, kind of how did that first one happen for you?
Yeah. So I would say like one of my core things about me that I will try and cling on to my entire life
Hmm.
is I try and be totally fearless. Like if I'm scared of
Love
something,
that.
like let's just do it. And with speaking, it's that performance piece for me, right? Like it
Yeah.
scratches that itch for me. It's totally different with therapy, and I think it fills both those needs to get
Yeah.
therapy
So
and
it's so
speaking.
cool, the yin and yang. As I was researching, I was
Yeah.
like, you're one day in like an office in these intimate, deep conversations, and then you're on a stage like lighting it up. I was like, that is so rad.
Oh, I love it. They're so different and oh, it fills my bucket. But I pitched myself like shamelessly. And I tell that with people all the time, like people who want to get into the speaking industry or people just who want to put themselves out there, whether it's asking out a person on a date, like you have to just put yourself out there. And so when I was getting started with speaking, I knew a niche that I wanted to get into was with National Charity League, some mother daughter philanthropic organization, kind of like Girl Scouts.
Yeah.
They have 250 chapters. Over the holiday break one year, I literally emailed all 250, just put on some good music and threw the spaghetti on the wall. And that got me my first speaking gig. And the speaking industry is such a snowball industry, right? Like
Yeah.
somebody hears you speak and then refers you. And that's really what started it for me. So, one of my things is you can't wait for people to approach you. You got to go out and ask them. 5 seconds
Yeah.
of courage is my mantra for life. Just put yourself out there.
I love that. Right. It's like close your eyes, hit the send button, and and we're just like innately really smart creatures as human beings. You know what I mean? Like I feel like often I'll reference like Richard Branson, he says, say yes and then figure it out. And it really is like say yes, try something that you want to. And if an opportunity comes, like you're going to figure it out. Like, you know what I mean? And if you don't, you're going to learn, but either way, it's going to be better than sitting there and going, what if, you know, and it's for me, I often find myself in, if I get caught in that space and get in this space of like, what if it goes wrong? It's flipping it, right? And going, well, what if it goes right? What if everything works out perfectly? And then that allows you to be in such a more beautiful space to create and build whatever it is that you do want to do.
I love that. I think that's golden. Like having the optimism that, you know what, it could actually go well. And also remembering too, like you're never going to be fully ready. So
we'll never be fully ready. Yeah.
You might as well just face the music and jump off the diving board and you'll figure out how to swim.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I love the living fearlessly. Like one thing for me that I've noticed is if there's something that I know I'm supposed to do and I go down that process and I feel like I'm about to throw up. I don't know if you ever had that feeling where you're like, I am so sick that I'm so uncomfortable. It's like, whenever that happens, now I have a reminder that I'm like, I'm doing something right. And it's scary and it's all of the things. But on the other end, that's always the most beautiful moments where you're like, wow, I grew, I learned, I experienced this thing that I never thought I could do.
Yes.
And you do it. So full circle with the vomit right here.
I know. I know. You're giving me a nice little exposure. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. That's the feeling that gets you going. So if you're listening to this and you're going, there's something you need to do and you feel like you're going to throw up, do it.
Do it.
You know what I mean? Take the action. So one thing that you talk to a lot of people about, and I think is super just real and kind of all over right now is like anxiety. And, you know, obviously COVID the last year and a half now, you know, I mean, so many people, you're in your house, you're locked up, you can't do as much. It's just an interesting world. And I guess I would be curious, like for anybody, let's say that's listening to this and feels that they do have that like anxiety, what would be like a tip or two that you would give them on kind of just like getting through that or walking through that? I'm not someone that, fortunately, I haven't ever felt like I had a ton of anxiety in my life. So I'm not the person to give the advice on this, but I'd be curious for you, like if someone's dealing with that anxiety, what are a few things they can do to kind of get through it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love working with anxiety. I mean, obviously just my own lived experience of it. And my husband's very open about his experience with anxiety too, because I think men and mental health is a whole other thing we could have a whole conversation about. But the big thing with anxiety is exposure. Like I just said a minute ago, like, oh, you're giving me a nice little exposure.
Yeah.
No, because we have to behaviorally show ourselves that we can get through the thing we're afraid of. Like the thing is, like you mentioned, like our brains are so smart. Like that's why, like, yes, mindset work is important, but the mind is like an excellent BS sniffer. And if you like try and positive talk your way out of something, if you're anxious, your mind is going to say like, well, I don't think you can actually do it. So I'm a big, big advocate of like behaviorally show yourself that you can do it. So if you're finding that you're having trouble leaving the house, like I think a lot of people are having more, you know, what we call agoraphobia of like really struggling with leaving the house. Gradually expose your way up, right? Like, can you go outside for 10 minutes today? Can you go to the grocery store? Can you go to the movies? You know, start to build your way up. Don't flood yourself. Like a lot of times we push ourselves too much and then we have like a trauma response because it's just too much too soon. So you got to have like a little bit of a hierarchical ladder and work your way up. But behaviorally make those changes, and then the brain starts to buy in of like, okay, yeah, you gave me the proof that you actually could do that. And then we see the mindset change. Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, an often example I give people is it's like building your brain muscle, right? And it's like building your anxiety muscle, we could call it. It's like if you went to the gym once and lifted a few dumbbells and tried to lift like the 100-pound dumbbells and left and you're like, I'm going to be fit for life. It's like that. Yeah. That is not the formula to success. Yeah. You know, it's like, you got to go day in and day out, do a little bit more the next day, a little bit more the next day. And it's like, I think, you know, with anxiety, it's like, if you can look at having anxiety and saying, how can I just get one more rep in today?
Yes.
And it might be a rep with the 2.5-pound dumbbell. And that's phenomenal because that's better than not doing any reps or looking at the dumbbell, right? It's like, you got to get those reps in. And as you do that enough, you'll work through it. So I really do love that.
Yeah, it's just like you were saying, those little incremental bits make a huge, huge difference. And not avoiding, like that is how anxiety wins, is when you avoid your life. Like when you say, like, well, I'm just not ready to date yet, or like, I don't like my job, but it'd be too hard to find another one. That is avoidance. And avoidance reinforces anxiety and it makes the waves look even bigger each time. So you got to ride the wave out and see that the wave breaks. That's how we actually move through the anxiety.
So how, let's say there's someone listening to this and they're going, I'm not avoiding anything. And they're looking left and right and they're going, but really I am. Uh, how do we get them? How do we get that? How do we give them a friendly nudge to say, get past this avoidance? It's freaking time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think you've got to pay attention to like your indicators, right? And when I say indicators, I mean values. So much of my work is helping people recognize what do you value. And that sounds so simple, right? But most people, if you sat them down, they actually would kind of maybe struggle to tell you what really matters to them in their lives. I
Yeah.
love doing a values card sort with clients, and people can even Google it online and print it out. I've got a free downloadable we can share for people.
Nice.
But you've got to know like your top 10 values. And if you're not living in alignment with those values day to day, like if your job doesn't reflect that, if you, let's say you love family and friends and you're not spending any time with them, there's some data right there for you that you've got to make a
Yeah.
shift. You know, you can't just be a bystander to your life and let your life happen to you.
Mm, let's go. Heck yeah. So obviously you're, speaking on loads of stages, you're talking, if I'm correct, to a lot of people in this college demographic, right? And they're in that big space of what the heck do I do with my life? And I'd be curious for you, like, what is a big stuck point where you see people kind of like have trouble getting through when it comes to figuring out their life? Like I would imagine you get off a stage, you have a handful of conversations with people that are, obviously thanking you and saying that was amazing. And then some people that are going, I don't know what the heck to do. Yeah.
I think the imposter syndrome right now is huge. Like, that is one of the big buzzwords I hear people share with me all the time. And people really resonate with that mantra I was saying earlier of like 5 seconds of courage.
Yeah.
And I'm such a big advocate of people finding mentors across generations. Like, one of the biggest problems I see with college students and people in their 20s and 30s, we keep our head down. Like, we keep ourselves in our silos and we are not asking the
Mm,
person 10, 20, 30 years ahead of us, how did you do that? Like, I'd love to learn more from
yeah.
you. And I think that is one of the biggest lost opportunities. Like, so many things have happened in my life because I've been willing to just reach out to someone and say, like, hey, I'd love to grab coffee with you sometime and learn more about your experience. People like to talk about themselves. And
True
so
that.
if people were brave enough to ask potential mentors, I think we would see people just rocket to success at such young ages, even more than we are now. But I think people feel like their age is a disadvantage, and it's
Mm.
actually a huge advantage.
Yeah. And like the student card is like the golden card, like to reach out to anybody and say, hey, I'm a student. I'm trying to figure out my life. And you can say whatever the heck out, can I buy you lunch? Can we go get coffee? Like you can say anything, because when you're a student, people are so much like, we've all been there in that phase of what I want to do with my life. And if you can leverage that card, like this ridiculous amount of doors that you can open.
Oh, I'm right there with you. Yeah. And I think way too many students don't take that card to their advantage.
Yeah. And you're right too. It's like a lot of people see it as a disadvantage when truly it's a massive advantage if you can frame it in the right way.
Yep. Yep. And if you're just brave enough to ask, like, what do you have to lose, you know?
Yeah. Worst that happens, they say no, they don't respond. Like when you're 18. And maybe the worst that happens is they say no and you go, okay, watch me. Right. It's like
Yeah.
you never know what's gonna happen unless you do it. So I want to jump to happiness for a second, because I am such a believer in life that, you could be successful, you could have, like a lot of the times people look at success monetarily, right? And it's like you could have that, but a lot of the times people achieve some things and they find themselves in like a depression. And one of the ways I measure happiness is success is between happiness and fulfillment.
Mm,
Um, and I went through definitely a phase of my life where I was not someone that was happy, And I think for a lot of people that I talk to today, I'm like one of the happiest people you'll ever meet. Um,
Oh.
but it was a process of like, there was this guy, Joseph McClellan III, and I was at this event because that's one of the things I do. And he had this book it was called like Happiness or something. I never actually read it, which I should go back and read it. But I remember seeing like they had it on the stand where they sell stuff after the things. And I remember seeing it. I was just like, wow, I need to like read that book because I need to be happier.
Mm,
And I'm curious for you, like, what would you say is a tip or two people can do on just being happier throughout their day-to-day life?
totally. I love that question. Biggest thing, easy answer is gratitude. I think it's so, so important.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm not the first person to say that, honestly, but we wouldn't keep talking about it if people were doing it, and
Amen. For real.
my favorite way to do it is what I call 5 daily gratitudes. Write down or just talk about 5 things within the 24-hour cycle that you're thankful for. And don't say, oh, I'm thankful for my friends, my family, my health. Like, yes, you should be, but
Yeah.
like really hone in on like what were those little moments in your day that you caught yourself laughing or smiling or lighter. Because our human brains, we are hardwired to be negative. Like that's not an individual thing. We're kind of fighting against our nature to be happy,
Yeah.
honestly. So, for every one bad thing, you need 5 things to combat it that are good in your life. And I really think we need to savor and sit with that so much more than we currently are most of the time.
For real. Yeah. I practice gratitude. I try to do it every day. Obviously miss a day here and there. But I do something very similar where it's like 10 things I write down that I'm grateful for. And it's just it makes you a little bit more present, I think,
Yep.
because sometimes we go through life and we go on autopilot and we wake up one day, we go, how the heck did I get here? So it gets you a little bit more present. And then, like you said, yeah, it's like, I mean, when you really look around, like you can be going through some of the craziest things in your life, but there's always something you could be grateful for. There's always something that can get your focus to happiness versus depression,
Yes.
or not happiness, I guess we would say. And so, Dr. Lauren, you are just a treasure to the world. I massively, massively appreciate you for being here. And I know we could go forever. I'm curious if people want to get more info on you and see what you're up to. I know you got books, you're speaking all over the country, you're doing a lot of different things. If people want to get more info on you, see what you're up to, where can they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So people can find me at drlaurencook.com. All my speaking information is there. I love, yes, working with universities, but also doing corporate work too, and really helping companies, making sure that they're integrating mental wellness for their teams. That's so, so important to me. If you are a reader, for anybody listening, we have a brain health book club where every month we feature a new positive psychology book, personal development book. And so far we've had all the authors join us each month for the call. So we have a lot of fun with that.
So cool.
And yeah, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. Lauren Cook. I'm TikToking these days and
Let's go.
having fun with the pointing and the dancing.
Awesome. So we'll put all that in the show notes so everybody can get it real easily. And last question I have for you. This is something we ask every guest because we want to help people find direction, but do it through like action, not just like sitting on a couch. Obviously, you could figure things out sitting on your couch, but nonetheless, I would be curious, what would you say is one thing someone listening to this can do in the next 24 to 48 hours to start finding direction in their life?
Oh, I love that. Okay, two things. It's going to be a little bit of a twofer.
Cool, totally.
I want you to reach out to somebody who could be a mentor to you. And I don't mean like a 5-year mentor, that's too much pressure, but who could be like a 5-minute mentor to you. And second, I want you to pick somebody who could be a devil's advocate for you and help you see things from a different vantage point. Because most of the time, the people in our lives are cheerleaders, which are great. We need that. But sometimes we need somebody who's willing to get uncomfy and challenge us to look at some different angles. So find those two people, send them an email in the next 24 hours and see what happens.
Boom. Easy as that. All right, everybody, go find those people, send them some emails. If you are, what were we saying earlier, feeling like you're going to throw up, if you're feeling like you're doing some avoidance, this is the moment right now when you're listening to this to just step into it. Like you're saying, have that 5 seconds of courage where you close your eyes, press the send button. You can thank us later. But Lauren, again, thank you so much for being here. Massively, massively appreciate it. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me on, Stu. This was great.
Absolutely.